This city once echoed with the rhythm of daily life. Streets filled with footsteps, conversations drifting from open windows, the faint sound of a radio playing in the distance. Shops opened each morning, buses followed their routes, and the town square lit up every evening with the glow of families gathering together. But then, it ended. No one remembers the exact moment when silence replaced the sound of life. Some claim it happened overnight. Others insist the change was gradual, with people vanishing one by one until the streets were empty. But the truth remains unclear. When investigators first arrived, they expected chaos, broken glass, signs of violence, the marks of a city in crisis. Instead, they found stillness, doors left unlocked, meals half finished, as if someone would return at any moment. In one home, a child's homework sat on the table, pencil dropped in mid-sentence. In another, a television flickered, playing to an audience that would never return. Why would an entire city abandon itself without warning? Where did its people go? There were no signs of evacuation, no packed suitcases, no roads clogged with fleeing cars, just absence. The clock tower in the center of town continued to keep perfect time, yet no one remained to hear it chime. Would you walk those streets, knowing that every sound you make is swallowed by an emptiness no one can explain? And if you did, how long would you stay before the silence began to press in on you? The city was called Raventon. Founded in the early 1900s, it began as a mining town before transforming into a modest industrial hub. By the mid-20th century, it was thriving thousands of residents, schools, theaters, churches, and a busy market square. And then, in the spring of 1971, Raventon's population, every man, woman, and child, vanished. Police reports from that month speak of an abrupt silence that spread across the region. Delivery drivers claim they arrived to find storefronts open but unattended. A postman described houses with letters still in their boxes, but no hands to collect them. Survivor testimonies are sparse, limited to those who lived on the outskirts and returned to find their neighbors gone. One woman reported seeing clothes still drying on a line, as if their owners had stepped away for only a moment. Another described a dinner table set for 5, candles still burning, with chairs pushed back as if the family had simply stood and walked out. But there were no bodies, no evidence of struggle, no trace of where the townspeople had gone. Newspapers at the time called it the silent exodus. Officials dismissed it as mass hysteria, but private notes in government archives paint a darker picture. Records of military investigators dispatched to search the city, and orders to seal their findings. Why did a city of thousands vanish in a single season? Why was the story buried so quickly? And why, even today, does Raventon remain untouched, its street? When visitors first returned to Raventon after the disappearance, they expected to find a city in ruins. Instead, what greeted them was something far more unsettling: stillness. The streets were empty, yet everything remained in its place. A diner stood with half-eaten meals still on the counter. Coffee cups sat beside folded newspapers, their headlines forever frozen in the year 1971. The jukebox was silent, but a coin rested inside, as though someone had intended to play just one more song. On the main road, a child's toy lay in the middle of the street, a red rubber ball, untouched, gathering dust. But no child was chasing after it. In a phone booth nearby, the receiver dangled loose, the line still connected. When one visitor lifted it, he heard only the faint hum of a dial tone. The phone still worked, but no one was left to answer. House after house told the same story. Doors unlocked, lights left on, plates set out for dinner. In one kitchen, a pot of water had boiled dry, the pan scorched black. Someone had been cooking, and then, nothing. What could cause an entire city to leave behind their lives in such a way? And why were there no footprints, no trail of where they had gone? Those who walked through the city spoke of a pressure in the air, as if the silence itself had weight. The more they explored, the heavier it became. Some reported a sensation of being watched, though not a single soul was seen. And then came the town hall. The visitors expected official records, perhaps answers. What they found made their blood run cold. In the council chamber, rows of chairs were overturned, as if a meeting had ended in panic. On the wall, a calendar still marked the date March 23rd, 1971. Every page after that was blank. And in the records room, a reel-to-reel tape machine sat waiting. Someone had left it running. The tape had ended, spinning in its loop, until the visitors pressed play. At first, only static, then voices, low, distorted, layered with interference. A man's voice broke through, trembling, repeating the same phrase, "They are here, they are here, they are here." The visitors shut it off immediately, but the words clung to them long after they left the building. If you stumbled upon a city like this, would you keep searching for answers? Or would you turn back the way you came, before you discovered something you could never forget? Those who dared to enter Raventon, after its fall, carried stories that only deepened the mystery. Explorers spoke of whispers drifting through empty streets faint, broken voices that seemed to come from no single direction. Some swore they saw figures standing in windows, only for the glass to reflect nothing when they looked again. Others described sudden headaches, dizziness, or the feeling of their hearts racing without reason, as though the city itself were pressing against their minds.
One traveler, a young man who entered with his brother, claimed that halfway down the market street, he heard children laughing. The sound grew louder until it seemed just behind him. When he turned, there was no one there, only his brother, pale and shaking, insisting he had heard it too. They left that same night, abandoning their supplies where they lay. The first explanations leaned on logic. Some suggested a mass exodus caused by disaster, a chemical leak, a spreading illness, something invisible that forced the townspeople to flee. But if that were true, where were the signs? No quarantine markers, no environmental damage. The animals remained stray dogs, birds, insects, all untouched. Whatever frightened Raventon's people away, it was selective. The second theory emerged in hushed tones. A government cover-up. Locals whispered of military trucks seen at the edge of town in the weeks after the vanishing. Rusted equipment was later found in the forests nearby canteens. Gas masks. Even a half-buried crate stamped with an official seal. But the reports were inconsistent. Some records vanished altogether. And why would the government erase the memory of an entire city? Still, explorers returned, convinced that Raventon hid something too important to ignore. And then came the discovery that would overshadow every other clue.
In an apartment on the second floor of a crumbling complex, behind a door locked from the inside, a journal was found. Its pages were brittle with age, the ink faded, but the words still legible. The entries began ordinary enough lists of errands, daily routines, complaints about work, but as the days passed, the tone shifted. The writer began describing the disappearance of neighbors one by one, doors left open, beds unslept in, entire families gone overnight. By the final entries, the writer confessed he could no longer sleep. He heard footsteps outside his door at night, knocking that never ceased, whispers seeping through the walls. And then came the last entry, written in frantic, jagged letters, "They are inside." The page ended abruptly, the final line scrawled so violently, the pen tore through the paper. What did he see? Who or what was in that apartment with him? The journal was the last trace of anyone who lived there, and to this day, no one knows who wrote it or what became of them. The journal found in that locked apartment is perhaps the most chilling artifact from Raventon. Its pages offer a glimpse into the slow unraveling of a city that should have been safe, ordinary, alive. The early entries seemed routine, mentions of neighbors, errands, even what the writer had eaten that day. But then, subtle cracks began to show. Mr. Halpern didn't open his shop today. First time in 20 years. No note on the door. Just gone. The Bransons' car is still in the driveway, but their house is empty. Milk delivered this morning is still on the porch. No one answered when I knocked. Over the following pages, the tone grew frantic. The writer documented entire families vanishing. Whole apartment blocks left hollow. They wrote of the silence in the streets, of dogs wandering without owners, of the way the night seemed longer than it should be. At 17 minutes into the recovered timeline, we arrive at one of the most disturbing entries. 6th night. The voices are louder now. They call from the stairwell. I tried to sleep with the lights on, but the bulbs burst one by one. When I woke, the door was unlocked. I never leave it unlocked. On the page before this one, I tried to write more, but the pen wouldn't move. I couldn't remember words. I couldn't think. Tonight, I must decide. Run, or... The page ended with a single word, scrawled in large, uneven letters. Run. And then, silence again. But it didn't end there. At the 22nd minute mark of analysis, researchers noted another entry only half complete. I watched from the window. Lights in the distance. Not cars, not lanterns. They floated, rising and falling like breathing. The whispers followed them, as though carried on the air. I heard my neighbor screaming, but when I ran to her door, no one was there. I don't think she existed anymore. The lights are closer. The entry cut off mid-sentence. The rest of the page had been ripped out. What happened that night? Did the writer witness something no human should ever see? And why did someone, perhaps the writer themselves, tear away the evidence? The journal wasn't the only discovery. Inside the town hall's archives, investigators found police reports filed in the days before the disappearance. They start ordinary complaints about noise, missing pets, and power outages. But by the final entries, the language changes. One report reads, "Caller claims strangers standing in the street, silent, staring at houses. Officers dispatched, but found nothing." Another, "Patrol reports lights moving in the hills. No vehicles identified. Officers describe interference with radios, loss of time." The last report ends mid-sentence, as if the writer was interrupted. Then there's the surveillance footage, fragmented reels, recovered from a small grocery store. The camera captures aisles stocked neatly. No people visible. Hours pass in seconds. Then, a flash of light. And just for an instant, shapes can be seen between the shelves. Blurred, tall, almost human, but not. The recording cuts to static immediately after. Personal belongings left behind only add to the mystery. A diary abandoned mid-entry, the pen still pressed into the page. A breakfast table left set with eggs half eaten. Steam still visible in photographs taken by first responders. A pair of shoes by the door, one lying on its side, as if kicked off in a hurry. How do we explain these details? If this was a human act, why erase an entire city? If this was natural, why is there no evidence of disaster? And if it was neither, then what force walked the streets of Raventon, emptying it one life at a time? Would you believe this was the work of something human? Or do you suspect, as some whispered even then, that something far older, far less forgiving, had arrived? Decades after the disappearance, Raventon became a forbidden fascination. Some called it cursed, others dismissed it as abandoned land. But for a few explorers, journalists, thrill seekers, investigators, the silence was an invitation. They entered with flashlights, cameras, and bravado. What they carried out were stories that turned their skepticism into fear. One team, arriving in the late 1990 seconds, described hearing footsteps echoing across the market square. At first, they believed another group of explorers was inside the city with them, but when they called out, there was no answer. The steps continued, circling them, until they fled into a nearby shop. When they locked the door, the sound stopped immediately, except for one, a single knock, slow and deliberate, against the window beside them. Another group recounted hearing doors slam throughout the night. They searched for the source, but each building was empty. The air carried no wind, yet the sounds echoed down every street. One explorer later admitted he counted 7 slams, evenly spaced, as if marking time. Their equipment fared no better. Cameras froze, batteries drained within minutes. Audio recordings captured only distorted static. One explorer swore he saw his own reflection in a shop window blink before he did. And then there were the shadows. One group of university students claimed they saw figures in the windows of an abandoned apartment block, pale shapes that stood still as statues, watching. They argued whether it was a trick of the light or squatters hiding inside. Gathering courage, they entered the building. Room by room, they searched. Empty. Dust covered every surface. And yet, from the courtyard below, their cameraman shouted because from his view, the figures were still there, staring out. The dread of Raventon has a way of convincing even the bravest minds to find ordinary explanations. Maybe it was vagrants. Maybe the power lines caused interference. Maybe they imagined it all. But the evidence kept piling up. One investigator described setting up 3 cameras along the main street. Each one failed at the same moment, the footage ending abruptly, replaced by a burst of white light. When he retrieved the memory cards, they were blank. Another team reported hearing voices whisper their names inside the school gymnasium. They ran, but one of them paused, convinced it was a prank. He swore he saw a child standing at the far end of the hall, motionless. When he turned to call the others back, the figure was gone. By now, the explorers should have left. Some did, but curiosity has a way of dragging people deeper, and it was during one of these expeditions that the most terrifying event occurred. A group of 4 entered Raventon on a late autumn evening. They documented everything: the deserted houses, The strange lights flickering in the distance, the constant feeling of being followed. But halfway through the night, one of them disappeared. The group claimed they had been standing together in the town square, reviewing their footage, when they noticed the fourth member was gone. At first, they thought he had wandered off. They called his name, searched the surrounding streets, checked the buildings. Nothing. His equipment was left behind, cameras still recording, backpack leaning against a wall. The footage showed him turning his head sharply, as if reacting to a sound. He stepped out of frame and never returned. They combed the city until dawn, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no trail, no sound. It was as if the city had claimed another, and that's when one of them vanished too. The last known disappearance linked to Raventon is the one that still haunts researchers today. His name was Daniel Harker, a journalist who had devoted years to unraveling the city's mystery. Unlike thrill seekers or students chasing legends, Harker came prepared. He carried maps, recording equipment, and weeks' worth of supplies. He was determined to stay until he uncovered the truth. On October 14, 2003, Harker entered Raventon alone. He told colleagues he would return in 5 days. He never did. What remains are fragments of his recordings, found scattered near the town square weeks later. The video reels were degraded, but enough survived to paint a picture, one that has unsettled even hardened investigators. At first, his footage was calm, methodical. He documented houses with untouched belongings, photographed the market, narrated his steps. But as the days passed, his voice began to change. On the second night, he recorded sounds outside his camp, faint footsteps, a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled along the street. His camera caught only shadows stretching unnaturally long across the pavement. By the third night, he whispered into the microphone, "They're following me, always behind me, never close enough to see, but I hear them breathing." The audio revealed more than his words. Beneath his voice, faint and steady, there was another sound, a low hum, rhythmic, almost like chanting. On the fourth night, his breathing grew ragged, panicked. The footage shook violently, as if he were running. At one point, he whispered, "They're here. They're right outside." Then a loud bang echoed through the recording, followed by silence. The final fragment lasts only 12 seconds. Harker's flashlight beam cuts across the wall of a building, revealing symbols scrawled in something dark. He gasps. His voice trembles as he says, "I shouldn't be here. They don't want me here." Then comes the last line, broken and barely audible. "They're here." The recording ends in static. When search teams entered Raventon days later, they found his equipment. His tent was torn, his supplies scattered, his notes burned into ash. But Harker himself was gone. And here lies the strangest part. The official police reports on his disappearance vanished from the archives. Witness statements were pulled. The memory cards containing his raw footage were said to be corrupted beyond recovery, yet somehow, pieces still exist in private hands. Why were the records erased? Who wanted his findings buried? And if he was simply lost, why hide the truth? The contradictions only deepen the terror. Some evidence insists Harker never made it to the city at all. Others show him walking its streets. Official documents deny the discovery of his recordings, and yet copies circulate quietly among collectors. What really happened to Daniel Harker? Did the city of Raventon claim him, just as it had claimed its original people? Or was his disappearance covered up, sealed away with the rest of Raventon's unsolved history? One fact remains. Harker was never seen again. His voice, whispering, "They're here," is the last living trace of a man who vanished inside a city already emptied of life. Raventon remains one of history's most disturbing mysteries. An entire city, its people erased, its streets left frozen in time. Theories have come and gone. Mass exodus, government cover-up, something far beyond human explanation. Yet none have offered answers. Every attempt to solve the riddle only leads to more disappearances. Explorers who enter often do not return. Those who do bring back stories too fractured, too terrifying to piece together. A city gone without warning. Families interrupted mid-dinner. Records erased. Voices caught on tape whispering words no one can explain. And then, silence. Always silence, waiting for the next to step inside. If a city can vanish overnight, without reason, without a trace, what's stopping it from happening again? What force has the power to erase thousands and leave behind nothing but shadows? Would you walk those streets, knowing you might be the next to vanish? Would you set foot inside a house where the last sound was a scream no one else heard? Or would you turn away because deep down, you understand what those who entered Raventon too late already knew? The city is not empty. It's waiting.